Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, happy Tuesday, everyone. We hope you're having a great day today. We have a phenomenal episode for you guys. Stefan, what did we talk about today?
We talked about the importance of being plugged into your church, into a community, why that's important. We also talked about really looking at your whole life, the big picture of needing to follow God and his plan for you all the way through, not just in one season, but in all seasons. And then we actually kind of talked about the history a little bit of Jewish culture, different things. So we kind of covered a lot of subjects today, and it was awesome.
Yeah. There's a ton of great encouragement in here. I would just second that. Like, it really is an emphasis on things about community, but also has to do with this idea of like wanting the reward without the responsibility, and this idea of like we want the praise, we want the recognition, we want the fame, but we don't want to put the effort into those things to like reach those goals. Even just in turn, like what that looks like in our community of faith, like, you know, doing the work. If you want to be someone that wants to be on stage and preaching, it's like, but are you doing anything to like get yourself to that point? Or are you just hoping someone just like drops the opportunity on your chest for you to be like, oh, perfect, now I can get on stage? Because you probably won't do it if that happens. Like, you honestly, like, it's not going to be realistic for you to be like, I'm prepared for this.
Or you just want to be on stage because it's like you can be seen.
Exactly.
Like, what's the purpose behind it?
100%. And there's just a lot of great stuff in here, and it was a great episode. I'm super stoked on it. So with that being said, Stefan, you ready to jump into this thing?
I'm so ready. Let's go.
Let's do this. All right. Stefan, how you feeling this morning?
Feeling good. I'm a little tired. Last night I was up for hours. So I remodeled our backyard, and for our dog to not like leave,
What kind of dog you got?
I have a King Charles Spaniel, and this dude, like, every time I come home, if it's in the backyard, can hear me and it just like scoots under the fence and like runs. We've got a runner. So anyways, I like positioned the rocks in a way to like make it so that he couldn't get out from under the gate. We had tons of rain last night, and I'd go to the side, and I kid you not, it was like this deep of water. It flooded so bad that it went up over onto our patio, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I'm out there literally digging like a river trench. I'm not even kidding you. Like, I'll take pictures and send it to you. Anyways, I'm just digging, and then it was weird. You have to like make sure that the end is lower than the top. So you get to a certain point, water's flowing out, and then you connect these two, and then you have to re-dig because of all the soot and like gravel that. Anyways, I'm tired. Real life holes last night. Just digging.
Is your backyard just dirt and like rocks, or were you digging into grass?
No. So we remodeled it, and we did pavers, and we did all on our own.
Okay.
So like I had men that came. And,
so you're the real Home Depot dad.
No, it was awesome. So I had my men's group. They came and we just did it like all together, and it was really awesome. But the gravel that I got were like huge gravel. Mm-hmm. And so you're not just like shoveling like little rock and just getting a scoop. It's like rock.
Yeah.
And so I'm having to like get in my hands and knees and just digging. Please don't show that. That probably looked really weird. But yeah, no, I'm doing good. Like, my house is no flood damage or anything, thank the Lord. But it was just, I like go outside. I'm like, oh shoot. So yeah.
Yeah. We've had a pretty good monsoon season. Like, I think it's already better than what we had last year, because last year we had maybe like a few days, I swear of it. But like the second monsoon season started, we had like a whole storm come in like twice, and it's already cloudy outside again too, which is the only thing that keeps me alive in Phoenix during the summer. Because otherwise I just boil in the sun and I melt. And being the white boy that I am, I just like melt into the pavement and blend in with it. So
I actually don't mind the heat that much.
Yeah, well, you're a different breed, Stefan.
my
I think
family's
99%
from like,
of Phoenix would disagree with you.
Well, my family's from Norway and Sweden and Minnesota, so you would think that I'm somebody that would care more about snow. But yeah. I don't know. I feel like once it gets over 105, it feels the same.
Well, that is true. When you get in your car and it's like that heat wave that hits you, it's like when
that's the best. It's like a pre-made sauna.
It's like when you open the oven to put the pizza in and that heat wave just hits you and you're
That's amazing too, because it's like a free face cleanser. Like you can just feel all the nast.
I'm just going to start leaving an old pizza in there. So every time I open the door, it just smells like a hot pizza cooked and ready for me. That's wow.
That's gross. That's not the same at all.
Oh man. All right. Well, enough chit chat. We got another chapter we're going through today. And we did chapter 7 from this past week, and we got a pretty stellar chapter for you guys. This is continuing the story of Gideon, and as we know about Gideon, do we actually know his exact age? Was he like 14 or 15? I don't remember if it ever said.
I remember you saying that, and I remember sitting here being like, where'd he get that?
I thought, well, yeah, confidence, right? No, I don't know exactly how old he is, but I know that he's younger. He's the youngest in his family. But nonetheless, he finds himself inadequate to be called by God to do his work. And God basically says, no, I believe in you. And he speaks life into him and encouragement, does it through multiple ways, gathers 32,000 soldiers, and then cuts that down to 300. And then basically they go into the camp of the Midianites during the middle of the night. And this is actually something we didn't touch on last week that I thought would be cool to just bring up real quick is they did it during shift change. And shift change in the context of this was around like 2 a.m. And so 2 a.m., middle of the night, I don't know where the moon was at the time of it, but like basically all they had to illuminate themselves was if they had like any fires going or the stars, maybe the moon, that would be out. But it was such impeccable timing for Gideon and his soldiers to drop the jars of clay and to create noise and confusion because there was twice the amount of soldiers out walking around during the night. I'm so sorry. I don't know why it crackled like that. Twice the amount of soldiers out in the middle of the night because they were doing a shift change, but they were all in their armor. And so as they made noise and they acted as if they were coming to the camp, the enemies, the Midianites, assumed that the soldiers that were walking around them were the Midianites instead of themselves. If they would have done this like an hour earlier when it was just the one watch, or if they would have done an hour later when everyone was in their tents, they wouldn't have assumed that it was the Midianites in their camp because they wouldn't have seen them. Or not the Midianites. They wouldn't have assumed it was the Israelites in their camp. And so I just thought that was cool. It was just like, it was like really strategic, honestly, on Gideon. It wasn't just like him dropping jars of clay and thinking that hopefully this works. It was like, no, we're going to do this at this exact time. And you obviously see that it was successful for them. And so that was just super awesome. But continuing the story, basically they're trying to track down two of the leaders, Zeba. I don't know how to say it. I don't know if it's Zeba or Zeba. And then Zalmunna. And basically they are... they're trying to escape, and Gideon is trying to follow after them and take them down. And kind of as like they're chasing down these guys, they're reaching out for help. And the first person or tribe that they come up to is the tribe of Ephraim. And Ephraim just kind of complains at them and is like, why didn't you guys invite us to like be a part of this and to do this thing? And Gideon responds in a more gentler tone and basically like shifts it to just like complimenting them and focusing on the positives with like Ephraim, or the Ephraimites, instead of trying to stir anger. And we were just talking a little bit before about this, about how that relates to like Proverbs 15:1, which talks about how a harsh word stirs up strife, but a gentle word turns away wrath. I think I said that backwards. I think it's the other way. But either way, the point is that like you see Gideon like actually doing that, and it stops conflict happening between the Ephraimites, which is actually different than what we're going to see, I believe, in chapter 12. But then moving on from there, they reach out to another group of people that are from, I believe you said the tribe of Gad, right? Mm-hmm. And these guys are Sukkoth. And basically, Gideon is like, our men are tired. We're exhausted. We've been up all night. We're trying to chase these guys down. We need bread. We need water. We need sustenance, like to keep us going. These guys are exhausted. And the men of Sukkoth are kind of like, we don't really want to help you out. And Gideon's kind of pissed about it. And so Gideon basically pledges that he's going to come back after they reach the leaders and finish off the Midianites, that he's going to come back and he's going to bring judgment and wrath upon them. And so after he do that, they go and they capture the remaining soldiers and the kings, they kill them, and then they come back, and he basically like grabs one of the young men of Sukkoth and questions him about the officials and the elders of Sukkoth. And basically there's like 77 men. And so he comes down and he basically like brings wrath upon all of them and kills every single one of those guys. And we'll talk a little bit about that and if that was a proper response, but it basically takes him out. And so that's kind of the end of the battle story. They got the Midianites, but then on top of that, Gideon in his wrath went back and killed these people of Succoth and the leaders of them. And then following that, you would think that like the next step is that Gideon is praised by the city and he becomes the king and he rules over them. And basically Gideon's like, I know you guys want us to like, you want me to like rule over you, but I don't really want to do that. But if you guys could give me some of your gold, that'd be cool. So they give him some gold. They're like, sure, no doubt. They all give him, I believe it's the rings. They give him rings or it's earrings or something. And earrings right there. Yeah. And so it ends up being a ton of gold when you add it up from all the Israelites that gave him some of the spoils. But then following that, he takes all that, he makes it into an ephod or an ephod, and then the Israelites start to worship that. And then you kind of see this like kind of downhill like fall of Gideon from like being this like leader that's taking charge with Israel to being a guy that creates this ephod, puts it up in front of like the town to see or in front of the tribe, and they start worshiping it. And then on top of that, he starts marrying like a bunch of different people and has a ton of kids. And it leaves us with one child in particular, Abimelech, which we'll talk about too at the very end. But basically, we kind of just see this downfall and this kind of downhill slide of Gideon to basically his death, where he started off great, married a bunch of people, and kind of took a downhill spiral. And then at the very end of it, has a bunch of kids. I believe it's 70 in total. And then he dies. And then at the very end, it says that they forgot. It says, and that they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done for them. And it also says that they, the second he died, that they turned away from Israel. Israel turned away from God and whored after the Baals, and the Baal beareth their God. It's kind of hard to read it with my eyes down like this through the podcast mic, but I think I caught it. But that's basically the story. And we got, there's so much good stuff in this. So let's go right back to the beginning. And Stefan, take us away with the first thing that we can kind of break down from this chapter.
So something that's really kind of important for us to know is it talks about how Gideon, he has to cross over with his 300 soldiers across the Jordan. And if you remember in the very beginning, the people of Israel, they had to cross the Jordan to go to the promised land. Mm-hmm. So what we're hearing in this story is that Gideon and the 300 men are going back to where they were. They're right. Leaving the promised land to chase after these Midianites, right. But they come across the Sukkoth, or the people that are part of the tribe of Gad. Mm-hmm. And then there was 2.5 tribes that asked Moses, hey, this land on this side of the Jordan is actually pretty awesome. We want to stay. And Moses is pretty upset. He's like, what? You want to stay on this? Like, we were promised the land on the other side of the Jordan. Mm-hmm. And he warns them in Numbers. He says in chapter 32, verse 6, he talks about how like if the people go across the river, across the Jordan, they're going to fight in these wars and they're going to be in these battles. And if you're on this side, you won't participate. Yeah. You won't be a part of it. And that's the same in our faith. If you're not a part of the church, you're not going to fight for the church. And if you're not a part of a neighborhood group, you're not going to fight for your neighbor. If you're not a part of the things that are godly, like, you're not going to fight for those things. And what's really interesting is Gideon, all he asked for is for some bread. Yeah. He's not asking for them to join the battle, but they kind of respond in, let's see how this turns out first. Yeah. Let's see. Because if you win, then like, okay, great. If they win, then they're going to come kill us because we supported you. Yeah. And I think that's sometimes how we position ourselves as Christians, is we go, let's see how this turns out first. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to take a side on this. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's okay to have different views on different things. Like, you can position yourself one way and disagree with another person. But the whole purpose of the church is to create a community to bring people to the gospel, to bring them closer to Christ. So it doesn't matter what your position is, but are you on the same mission as everybody else of the church, bringing people to the gospel, bringing people to Christ? And I think that sometimes we position ourselves of, if I help you, then people are going to dislike me, so I'm just not going to help. Mm-hmm. Or I'm not going to say my voice on this topic because like it might look bad for me. So the question really is, are you for the gospel or are you for you?
Which kind of just goes back into the last chapter we talked about, where the two different things that God kind of chose as a prerequisite to going into war was that you had to be rid of fear and rid of self-centeredness and self-ambition. And so just kind of seeing that theme being carried out through these kind of chapters, or through these few chapters of just like how much of what we do is for ourselves versus for what God has called us to do and for the kingdom, which is really convicting because we live in a culture where it really is revolved around us. Like every advertisement you see, every billboard, every like TV show, every social media post, like every movement is just around the idea of like, it's all about you. And that's completely opposite to what the gospel is about, how it's not about us anymore, which is just...
It's mind-boggling, but you bring up a great point. It's all about us. And when we first are introduced to Gideon, he's all about God.
Yeah.
Like he listens to him. He's like, God, show me a sign. Give me a sign for this. And every single step he takes, he kind of talks to God about, how am I supposed to do this?
Yeah.
And when God says, strip down your army from 32,000 to 300, he didn't even like bat an eye. He was like, okay, go home.
Yeah.
Like you dog lappers. And
you friggin' lappers.
You lappers.
You need it with an accent.
But
you
this is kind of crazy. If you go down to verse 19, Gideon replied, "Those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you." Turning to Jethro, his oldest son, he said, "Kill them." But Jethro did not draw the sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. And this is in response to him asking those two Midianite leaders, like, who did you kill? And they were talking about the different people that they had killed. And he just says that those are my skin and blood.
Yeah.
And when you really read the text, compared to chapter 7, God's kind of omitted from this chapter.
Yeah.
It's kind of Gideon doing his own thing. He tells the people of Sukkoth, I'm going to come back and rip your skin off with thorns. And like, he's like kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's
like
definitely aggressive.
It's not the same man. And so he's being vengeful. Like
Yeah.
he's going off on his own. He's doing his own thing. And we kind of see this weird flow of Gideon. There's chapters 6, 7, and 8, where he's following God's voice.
Mm-hmm.
And then he starts to take matters into his own hands. And then when it comes to like the kingship, when they ask him like, can you rule over us? Like you've done all this great stuff. He doesn't want to be a part of it at all.
Yeah.
And it's just this weird downward spiral of he is a person of God, but by the end of his life, he's not.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely seen throughout the text that he takes a spiral down, and you definitely notice that once he reaches the people of Sukkoth, which is just really aggressive, because that was one thing that I thought about in the beginning too. I was like, all right, this guy is appointed by God, and he's being like led by God to do this. And all of a sudden you see him like reach out for help, and they say like, no, we don't want to help you. And he's like, I'm going to come back and murder you. And you're like, is that ordained by God? Like, is that like how I can respond to people? Like, am I allowed to go do that? If I'm like, hey, donate to my mission trip. And they're like, I'm not going to donate. And I'm like, I'm going to come murder you. Like,
well, what does Jesus say? He even talks to his disciples about this. If like someone's against you, like just wipe off the dust.
Yeah.
Like go to the next thing. Like don't even think about it for another second.
No, exactly. Which just ties perfectly into answering that question of like, just because like we read some of these things in text doesn't mean that it's ordained by God or approved by God or any of those kind of things. And we'll see kind of following from here in some of the future chapters talking about like Jephthah. He makes an oath with God, basically saying that like he's going to offer something for him if he wins. And we'll talk more about that too. But basically, like that wasn't what he did. It wasn't something that God was celebrating. It wasn't something that he was like, I'm glad that you've done this with me. And we're just going to see that a lot throughout the text. And it's going to make you kind of question, like, is that like who our God is? Like, does he do those things? And we just have to really be careful to read the text properly and understand like when something is allowed by God and when it's not. And it might not directly say it in the text, but you can derive it from the commandments that come from the Torah or the first 5 books of the Bible. And so it might not say directly that like, God was displeased with Gideon because of what he did with them. But like, you can just see that like Gideon's like, it's not like he went up from there after he made that decision. It seemed like that was the start of like his downfall. Mm-hmm. And so that's just good clarification for us that it doesn't always mean when you see something in text that God is approving of it, which is definitely not the case here. So kind of moving forward from that, we kind of have this weird, like Gideon does like incredible like feats, and he takes down the Midianites with only 300 men, right? Like he's still able to do it. He comes back, he has this vengeful wrath, and he kills all these people. And then following that, as they succeed in this, Israel is like, come rule over us. And he's like, I don't really want to, but kind of give me some of like your money. Like you had a phenomenal takeaway about this a long time ago, actually, when you were first going through the book of Judges, and you shared it with me, and like it struck a chord with me, and I thought it was super relatable. So I'd love for you to just kind of share like what you learned from kind of this behavior from Gideon.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read the text. The Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon told them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And he said, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from the share of your plunder. And the takeaway of this is Gideon, he did want all of the reward. He wanted the gold, he wanted the fame, but he wanted none of the responsibility of being king. And that is us today. We want all the followers, all of the whatever, we want all of the fame, but we don't want to put in the work and the effort that it takes to get to that spot. And really, honestly, fame and followers doesn't matter. Like it really isn't a big thing, but I think that's something that we really care about is like, I want somebody to ask me to baptize them. Or I really want to do like really good stuff in my home. Like I want a really healthy home and a really healthy marriage, but are you putting in the work and the effort that it takes to have that? And really good marriages have tough conversations. You know, really good friendships go through really tough times of like, why aren't you doing this? Like, why are you being a bad friend in this situation? And so, man, you need to be responsible. You need to be able to own up and work hard for things that are good in this world.
I see it way too often in our society nowadays where no one wants to do the work. Like we just live in an entitled society where we grow up being handed every single thing to us, and then we just kind of expect the world to give things to us regardless of our level of work or effort into it. And I 100% agree with that sentiment that like if you want something, like you need to put the work in for it. And even when it comes to like our faith, like we say things like, man, I want to be like a leader and I want to get involved and do these things, but it's like, but what are you doing right now? Like this goes back to like behind closed doors, right? To like fixing your home and like everything with you first, like, but what are you doing with your faith right now? Like you say you want to be a leader, you say you want to be preaching on stage and like making an impact for like people all across the world, but like, are you taking care of like what God has already given you now? Like, are you managing your responsibilities that God has already placed in your life well right now? Or are you just pointing up at the sky and saying, I want to be there, but you're not going to, build the ladder to get to it?
Yeah. Something that you kind of brought up, I want to make sure that we're really hitting in the text. He says in there, Gideon says, the Lord will rule over you. And it sounds really good. Like it sounds amazing. Oh man, he's like this super godly man that understands like the hierarchy.
He's like, oh, theocracy. Like, yeah, that's the best way to rule.
But this is kind of something that's kind of messed up. So when you get back down to the very bottom, my text says like Gideon's death. And it talks about how he has this concubine that lives in Shechem that bore him a son whom he named Abimelech. Who he named. And I remember talking to somebody who is of Jewish culture who was telling me like, well, women name the children and this certain thing. So maybe Gideon didn't name him Abimelech. And I'm going to tell you why this is kind of important of why I'm bringing this up. But in the text, it makes it very, 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 very clear. Gideon named him. He named him Abimelech, which means my father is king. And he said, I'm not going to be your king. My sons aren't going to be your king. But he names his son like, I'm the king. And it just kind of goes back to what you were saying of like, what's your integrity behind closed doors? Like you say this out here, this is how you act out here. But in reality, what's your heart? What's your heart?
100%. And it's also kind of sly because it wasn't like Gideon. He wasn't asking a bunch from a bunch of people. He was asking a little from a lot of people. And it ended up being like a ton. Like I think it was like 50 pounds of gold or something like that, which is a ridiculous amount. So he was being sly in his efforts to like get the reward that he wanted without it seeming like he was being selfish. So he was pretty sly about it.
Well, you even saying that just like made me realize something. So this is his like concubine side chick in a different area.
Yeah.
He didn't name his son who is in Israel, my father is king. He named his son who's off somewhere else that really probably not everybody knew about.
Yep.
And then later we see in the next chapter, he comes and murders everybody.
Yeah.
And becomes king because he like forces it. So it's like that intention of, I remember the pastor of the church that I'm at, he talked about how you have a filter. Your life is a filter. And eventually the dust is just going to be coming through. If you don't change that filter, eventually that filter is going to be so clogged up that the stuff that you've been hiding, your intentions you've been hiding, is going to bleed out.
Yeah.
So like if you're cussing in the way that you hang out with your friends on this side of the city, like eventually that's going to bleed into your church life. If you're acting a certain way, like you have a pornography addiction and you don't tell anybody about it, and then you're in this relationship, those actions and those temptations and the things that you start to think is appropriate in the confines of a relationship is going to bleed into that relationship instead of being pure. And so Gideon, he's this guy who's acting like the Lord is king. And then you said in the very last text, it says that they didn't treat his family well.
Yeah.
Because his intentions started to bleed out and they knew he's a fraud.
Yeah.
He's a fraud.
Yep. Gideon's a fraud, bro. What is an ephod?
So an ephod is a garment that was created for the high priest. And what they would do is it was paired with the breastplate, and they would wear this ephod. So Samuel, later in the book of Samuel, he wears an ephod, and they would wear this when they would have when they were trying to seek divination or prophecy, like they were trying to know what God was going to say to them. So the breastplate that was paired with the ephod, what it had is this, what was called the Urim and the Thummim, and it was these stones, the Thummim. I'm pretty positive that it was these stones, it was black and white, and it meant like guilty or innocent. And it was kind of like they would ask God a question. It was like a binary system, yes or no. And the fact that Gideon creates this ephod, and then it says that it was in verse 27, at the very end, it says that it became a snare. The ephod became a snare to Gideon and his family. So you just see in the context that Gideon creates this ephod, and then he asserts himself as the priest, as the prophet. And he's just starting to wear it or worship it and say, this is what God says. But is it what he was actually saying? And he's inserted himself, even though he says, I'm not your king, but I'm your prophet.
Yeah.
I don't want the like to look as the king, but I do want the reward. And I don't, I'm not going to live a certain lifestyle, but I'm going to have all these women and I'm going to do all these things. It just, your intentions bleed out. They do.
100%. And I mean, even just kind of following from that, we're going to see in the next chapter, like, the downfall of like Gideon's sin and how that kind of passes down into the next generation because he failed as a father. I mean, he also had like 70 kids. So I don't know how you raise 70 kids in a household. I don't think you do that. So clearly we're going to see Abimelech and the horrible leader that he was and what he did. But one really interesting thing, just to kind of cap this off, is you read at the very end in chapter in chapter 8, where in verse 28, it says, so Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more. And then it says, and the land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. But like we read in the text, like following it, that like he made an ephod and then the people started to worship it, which clearly contradicts what like the commandment of do not make any idols or false like wooden carvings or any of these kind of things, and then worship that thing. And they started worshiping this. And then it literally says that right as he died, that they started to worship the Baals. So like, I mean, clearly they were doing it before that Gideon died. It wasn't like they were worshiping God and all of a sudden like he died and it was like a curse was lifted off of the people and all of a sudden they had eyes to see and they're like, oh my gosh, we had to go back and worship our other gods. Like they've been doing this like through that span of those 40 years. And just because we have comfortability and rest doesn't mean that there's spiritual health or we're spiritually healthy in that season too. And that's like how we are in America. Like we think that because there's prosperity, because there's like more financial security, because we have all of these things, that like God is blessing this nation and that we're like thriving as a Christian nation. When the truth is the complete opposite is happening. Like we are spiritually bankrupt in this country right now because of so many underlying issues that we're battling because we want to conflict with scripture. But on the outside, it looks great. And so while it says that Israel had rest in the land for 40 years, that doesn't mean that there was spiritual maturity, that there was like a fruitful relationship with God happening. And like the same thing can go for our country. It can go for a business. It can go for like a group. It could be like, hey, we have a church that has a ton of people going to it. We got like thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming to our services. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's spiritual growth happening. It doesn't mean that there's like fruitful relationships actually happening in this building. Like just because you guys have good numbers and just because you have like money flowing through the business doesn't mean that things are going well. And so like, do not be like misled in the text. Like just because there was rest doesn't mean that Israel was doing their part in having a healthy relationship with God.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that we do is we pair in American evangelism comfort to Jesus.
Yeah.
When in reality, if you look at the life of Jesus, it was confrontation. Mm-hmm. He was going into the synagogues and there was men with withered hands and there were sick people and he was healing them. And he was stripping down what they had created in their culture of like, oh, you can't help somebody on the Sabbath. And he's like, isn't life way more important than you like holding some ritual that you've created? Yeah. Like, isn't this person's life more, if there was an animal that fell into a pit, you would go get it. But right. Yet this human, you won't.
Yeah.
And so he's confronting, there's the man that has the demon possession and he's casting out the demons in front of everybody. And which is kind of funny that city, Capernaum, or Capernaum mm-hmm. is the city of comfort. And it's just like this thing where, people just didn't go to synagogue whenever they wanted to, like in American culture where like the average person goes once a month, twice a month. Like you go to synagogue, yet this man is possessed by demons. And it's like he was comfortable living his life. Yeah. Like he's possessed by demons. He goes to synagogue. He hears the teachings. He does all these things, but he didn't confront the issues that were in his heart. And so like we have this idea that if I'm comfortable, Jesus approves. Yeah. But in reality, sometimes you have some things that make you comfortable, but pull you away. Yep.
100%. I think that there's a false lie that we believe that like we're doing the right thing when we're in comfort. But I feel like we have a hard time, like, so we'll talk about it all day long that we have, this problem with comfort in society, but like, how do you get out of that comfort? Like what does it look like to do the opposite of it? Like, is it on an individual scale? Like we just need to focus on our relationship, or if like we see a church doing it, do we need to like call them out for that? But like, I mean, we're living in an entire country that basically lives by this. It's like in the land of America had rest and peace for 200 years, or let's say since World War II, like we've had rest over the land for like 80 years. But you look at like where we are spiritually and like everything in society has been pushing God away. Like it's all just hinting towards this idea of like, we've taken like we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance in school, right? And like they're taking that out of public schools now. We used to pray before school started and they took that out. And the idea of like being a nation founded on like Christian principles has just faded. But we've seen like, and if you look at the studies, look at the actual stats that are out there, like crime is up higher than it's ever been before, like sexual immorality, divorce, like in every area of life that we would measure like the actual health of our country, like everything else is diminishing except for the sides of like the economy as far as like the money that we make. And it's like the things that really are what God warns us about of like money, you either worship me or you worship money. It's like one of the two. And it seems like money is being prospered in the land of America, but God is just being pushed to the side. But like all that to say, like how do we combat that as being Christians in America? Like, is there any way that we can like help that situation and kind of like change that at all? I don't know.
I think this is actually like a perfect bow to end our devotional on this chapter, is it goes back to the takeaway that we talked about earlier about Sukkoth, about people on the other side of the river.
Yeah.
If we as Christians were to step up and go to church together and we were to be in neighborhood groups and to really live life together and to call each other out and like to have a relationship where you can do that. Like, how many people actually have a mentor? Like, they wake up, they go about their week, and they have someone that they can call and say, at work, I have this issue, I need some guidance. How many people are actually doing that or making decisions based on their own whim? Like Gideon, I don't like you because you did this to me, and so now I'm going to avenge whatever feeling I have against you.
Yeah.
And I think it just goes back to the overarching theme of chapter 8 is, are you separate from God's plan and doing your own thing?
Yeah.
Or are you with the community of God fighting together?
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I just imagine, like, if Gideon would have invited like other people within the 300 of him to like consult what they should do with the people of Succoth, I guarantee you they'd be like, dude, let's just like put them behind us. Like, we'll find food elsewhere. Like, let's just keep moving forward. But Gideon didn't. Like, it was his sole decision. He was like, I'm going to come back and murder you because of what you did. And on top of that, he like is trying to force a young man, like it was his kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to force his kid to like kill them. And it's like, dude, like, you're crazy.
Yeah. So he was trying to force his kid to kill the 2 Midianite leaders. Yeah. And like, he didn't.
Right.
And then those guys said, do it yourself.
Yeah.
Like, what's your problem? And that just sets us up perfectly for chapter 9. You see, it doesn't say in the text that Abimelech was present, but you can just see Gideon's character as a father. And it sets us up for this picture that the way that he raised his kids were to be violent.
Yep. 100%.
So
we're definitely going to see that. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this devotional for the day. If you guys love this, we would really appreciate it if you guys left a review for us. It's actually like the best way that you can help us to get this content to other people. And if not, follow us on social media. We love to post little like real snippets of this stuff as well. And people are loving it. And so we're just going to continue doing that. But again, you can be a part of this discussion and conversation. If you want to share your takeaways or you have questions for us, hit us up on our Instagram at AskUsWhy. And with that being said, we hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Yeah. Love you guys. Thank you guys so much for being on. Peace out.